It all started with an old, forgotten box, a simple wooden crate, tucked away in the attic of a house no one had lived in for decades. When Daniel and his friends found it, they weren't looking for anything special, just some cheap thrill, a reason to be in a place they had no business being. The house had a reputation, the kind of reputation that kept doors locked and curtains drawn when night fell. They called it the Larkwood House, though no one really knew why. The name had been passed down like a warning, whispered from one generation to the next. Inside the attic, dust floated in the air like tiny ghosts. The air was stale, thick with the scent of forgotten things. Daniel pried the box open, and inside, wrapped in a cloth so old it crumbled at his touch, were two carved wooden figures. They were small, no more than a few inches tall, but something about them was wrong. They weren't detailed, just crude human shapes, but their heads were too large, and their eyes, if you could even call them that, were just hollowed-out pits. As soon as he held them in his hands, an uneasy feeling crawled up his spine, like someone was watching. His friends laughed it off, but even they didn't want to touch them. That night, Daniel took them home. He left them on his desk, trying to shake the feeling they gave him. He told himself it was just his imagination. But when he woke up around 3 a.m., his bedroom door was open. He always closed it. He sat up, heart pounding. The room was silent, but something was off. The figures, he had left them facing forward. Now they were turned toward his bed. He swallowed hard and reached for his phone, but his hands were clammy, trembling. The air felt heavy, like the room itself was watching. The next morning he told his friends, but they just laughed. "You probably bumped the desk in your sleep," they said. He almost believed them. Almost. That night, he locked his bedroom door. He put the figures in his closet, buried them under a pile of clothes. He needed sleep. But at 3 a.m., something woke him up again. A soft, rhythmic tapping. He froze. It was coming from the closet. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. His breath hitched. He reached for the lamp, but before he could turn it on, the tapping stopped. Silence. And then, the closet door creaked open. He didn't move. He couldn't. His eyes locked onto the darkness inside the closet. The pile of clothes he had buried the figures under shifted. And then, as if an unseen hand was guiding them, the figures rolled out onto the floor, facing him. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he tried to get rid of them. He took them to the woods, dug a hole, and buried them deep. He told himself it was over, but when he got home, they were waiting, right there, on his desk. That was when the dreams started. Strange, suffocating dreams. He was in the attic again, but he wasn't alone. There were whispers, low, urgent whispers. He could never understand the words, but the voices were desperate, begging. One night he woke up with a start, his throat dry, his heart hammering. He felt something in his hand. Cold, small, wooden. The figures. He had no idea how they got there. The next morning, he called his grandmother. She was the only one who might know something. When she heard about the figures, she went silent. Then she told him, in a voice so low it was barely above a whisper, "You need to take them back." "Back where?" he asked. "To where you found them." He didn't argue. He just did it. That night, he and his friends returned to the house. The attic felt different now. Colder, heavier. The air seemed to press down on them. As soon as he placed the figures back in the box, the room felt lighter, as if something had been waiting for this moment. They didn't stick around. They left and never went back. But Daniel swore. As they drove away, he saw movement in the attic window, a shadow, watching. Weeks passed. The nightmares stopped. The house remained empty. And yet, sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled just right, he could still hear it. Tap, tap, tap.